introduced last week.
That was me.
So you introduced last week, so I got to do it this week.
You got to do it this
Who
week.
did it the week before?
Oh, that would be you.
So this is my
Eric
week.
did it last week.
Yeah.
It lasted
I did
10 minutes.
last week.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was like this 20-minute.
Despite the
20-minute.
Despite the peanut gallery, calling me out on being too long-winded. So let's see how you do.
Well, yeah, but when I called you out for being too long-winded, that was only like 10 seconds.
I know. Ironical, ain't
Yeah.
it? Hi, folks.
Hi. Welcome to Rock Paper Hand Grenades. We're having a little bit of a spat again.
As usual.
This is my super awesome co-host. What's your name? Eric Eastman,
That's me.
the former representative, i.e., honorable. That's really
allegedly,
cool. Allegedly,
i.e., honorable.
That's really cool. You run for office, you get into office, you're honorable forever.
And you're,
At least on paper.
yeah, you're
nothing
you're
personal.
saddled with a higher
Yes, I know.
standard for life.
So you can put it on all your letters, honorable.
Yeah. If you're like that.
Okay, so my super cool guests today are Mark and Darlene Pawlik. Now, we haven't had Mark on, but Darlene's been on here I don't know how many times. And you were president of New Hampshire Right to Life. You're now the president of We Are One.
Vice president of Save the One.
Save the One. And you're here to talk about human trafficking, but because it's Human Trafficking Month, which I don't know who comes up with this.
That's an interesting.
Yeah.
No, but
So-
it's good to call attention to things like this.
It
This
is
one
good.
way
It
of
is.
doing it.
It is good.
So-
It's a very important subject. It's sad, horrible, and everything else, but we'll try to make light of it.
We always do.
We do. We're horrible.
They're
We're
irreverent.
very bad people. So,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
we've never been on the show before, and I want to say I know a lot of people that are involved in different pursuits, and I don't think spouses get nearly enough credit because it's you usually have one person that's the face of whatever they're fighting for.
Nice face too.
Yes, it's a very beautiful face, but you don't see the other person that's involved making sure that happens. Making sure because without support, you're like a one-armed paper hanger. You know what I mean?
Or something.
It's very honorable and awesome of you to be willing to come on the show because not many people are willing to do that. We both know that, right?
So we're glad you're here. Thanks for
So,
Thank you very much for
Anyway,
having me.
thank you very much for all you do because that is pretty cotton-picking awesome.
Appreciate it.
Anyway, young lady, so who comes up with this this month is thing? Do you have any idea?
I really don't. It is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and the 11th was Human Trafficking Awareness Day. And so there was a big bill down in D.C. being looked at on the 11th. It's called SESTA, so I don't know the acronym actually, but it was the Stop Sex Trafficking Online bill, and it had to do with the CDA, so the Communications Decency Act has a little tiny clause in it called Section 230 that absolves ISPs of any responsibility if illegal activity is done on their platform.
Right.
So there were a couple of big companies. One was called Backpage. In here, and there's also Craigslist. There's a few more that actually sell people online, and this is illegal. Oftentimes, it's children, which is really horrendous.
Well, both are horrendous. Okay, devil's advocate, how would they know that, like, in other words, if I've got, and I don't know enough about the sites themselves, okay, but let's say I create a software to create a site that gives people unfettered access to one another, how could I possibly keep track well enough to know that, somebody's not just selling bicycles or stolen bicycles for all I know?
Yeah.
How are they responsible when they may not really have any way of knowing?
Well, that is a really good question. And there's a whole documentary on it to answer that question. It's called I Am Jane Doe, and it's on Netflix right now.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think it's about an hour and 10 minutes, and it answers the question. There are lawyers involved in this. There were parents who tried to sue Backpage because their advertising platform allowed for this to happen. And there are some players within the Backpage hierarchy that actually tweaked the language for these advertisers to help them to sell. So instead of using young, they would use fresh, and they would use emojis like flowers or cherries, things like that. And they would suggest to these advertisers how to use these different ways of manipulating their ads.
Now,
Right.
where is that company out of? Is it United States?
Yep.
It's an American
believe
company.
so.
It's an
I-
American company
I
that
couldn't
is.
swear to that.
And they were their employees were complicit in helping craft the language to make these ads successful.
That's the gist of the whole I Am Jane Doe film.
Wow. This
Yeah.
is Pizzagate Part 2.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah, it's really awful.
that's wicked horrible.
Well, I'm glad it's on the Hill. I'm glad it's being looked at.
Yeah.
So what does the bill do? Does it make it makes them culpable?
It allows for civil action, basically.
Civil. It should be criminal.
It should be criminal,
Yeah.
and it may have that impact. But the plaintiffs are suing for civil action at this point. They don't even have that. They can't even sue. I actually testified on HR. I'm not sure if it was 22 or 33 right now, but it was an act asking for New Hampshire to tell Congress to move on this. And it was just last week. And I had the privilege of sitting next to one of the moms of one of the girls who had been sold on Backpage. Yeah, it was a very tragic story. This was a couple. They live in a nice house. They own their house. They've been married. They both work, very loving family. None of the risk factors that you would think of. And their 15-year-old daughter said, I want to go to the mall with my friends. And they said, okay, go to the mall with your friends. They had their phones on them. They were together with other kids. You know, it wasn't like
Sure.
she was off by herself. And around 9 o'clock, they tried calling her, and no answer, and no answer. And through the night, no answer. And she managed to get the cell phone records and track down the calls that she had made, and she started phoning everybody who had called her daughter's phone. And she found the man who had sold her on Backpage. And they had sold her they kidnapped her and put her in a hotel room, and she was raped that night, and then they dumped her back at home the next day, or at some time later. I'm not sure if it was the very next day, actually. I was listening, but it was very emotional for me, so I don't
Yeah.
remember the exact specifics. If you watch I Am Jane Doe on Netflix,
I Am Jane Doe.
you'll get the whole story.
Holy crap.
Is that the only the digital distribution venue that you can acquire this?
I don't know. I know
Documentary?
that people are showing it, like churches are showing it, and different civic. I think it was shown at one of the Rotaries out in California. So I'm following it on Twitter and on Facebook and stuff. So there are other venues where you can watch it, but I'm not sure if you could just Google and download it. I don't know.
Right.
What a brave and necessary film.
Yeah.
Terribly necessary.
Hey,
My.
just to break this up, because that's just too emotional. That's what I'm saying. Did you guys hear one of the coolest things? I don't really like stadium, really, because I just think it's all
Theater.
fluff, theater,
It's theater.
And this is Jane Joe who did something, and they have him come up, and it's all theater. And it's been theater forever. Clinton was like that, and I think everybody has been like that. But the one that they did yesterday, the one Trump did yesterday, I was totally impressed with. Did you hear this? Let's see if I get the guy's name. Let's see.
It's neat. I haven't seen it.
Oh, what is his name?
have to
Oh,
look.
yeah. Ji Seong Ho.
Mark was telling me about it.
Tell if you remember enough.
Pretty much. This was a story of a young man who was injured by a train when he was trying to steal some coal so he could buy some food for his family. Train ran over one or both of his legs. It wasn't clear. Appears he has now one prosthetic leg.
Yeah.
His younger siblings tended to him and nursed him back to health, but the timing isn't clear to me. But somewhere in the process, he went through amputations with no anesthetics, and he was tortured and beaten by the North Korean authorities. Somehow, it fast forwards quite quickly in the story in the State of the Union address, but he makes his way across the border into China with his family on crutches, and gets eventually to South Korea, where he has now set up some kind of ministry, some program to broadcast truth and news to the North Korean people. So, yeah, it was one of the more emotional moments of the State of the Union address.
It was like mine, because he had to hobble across China to Vietnam, and then over to South Korea,
Okay.
and he's broadcasting Christian ministry.
That's what it was.
Too.
Christian ministry, right?
He's
With
a
his
Christian.
family, he was able to.
Well, no, his whole family didn't make it. His father was captured and tortured and died.
Oh
Yeah.
my God! Wow.
You know, so when we as Christians in the United States feel sometimes put upon, we should count our cotton picking blessings.
Yes.
Right, right.
But that was a really great story, and I really liked it because it really had nothing to do with Trump.
Right.
You know what I mean? It wasn't like this is the program we did, and look how great I am, and now here's evidence. It was just a really cool story. I'm not really quite. Oh, it was just talking about the abuses of North Korea primarily. Yeah.
So that's how it dovetailed into
That's
being
how it
germane
dovetailed,
to the
yeah.
State of the Union.
Yeah,
address?
but it was an
Okay,
awesome
got it.
story. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to get that in. I wanted to get that story because I was just so impressed.
Brave soul.
There's a lot of real brave people out there.
On the subject of trafficking, which is the breadth of the subject is immense.
It is.
obviously. We have viewers, and some of them can be pretty proactive. Sometimes they call in, they have ideas, they take issue with something we've said on the air, or they want to supplement it, and so they're thinkers, and they care. What can people do to contribute to better outcomes in terms of this huge issue that's hard to grapple with?
Yeah, it is a huge issue.
Are there
First of
volunteer
all,
opportunities?
there are. So the first thing I want to say, though, is trafficking doesn't necessarily involve transportation.
Okay.
So it's not about transportation, it's about exploitation. So it can happen within families, it can happen in neighborhoods, it can happen in, like in a restaurant situation where somebody's labor trafficked, or it could happen in, somebody's cousin could be holding them and forcing them to have sex with men for money, and all kinds of things, engaging in porn, for example. So I think that what people can do is kind of keep their eyes open for exploited people. And as far as volunteering, New Hampshire does have a task force, and there may or may not be things that they can do relative to the task force. I would suggest they get in touch with Becky Ailing, who is she's in charge of the task force right now. She works at Child and Family Services. They can get in touch with me, and I can put them in touch with her too. And I think just keeping your eyes open. So there was a story last year about a flight attendant who saw a girl. She looked really uncomfortable. She didn't look right. And so she left a note in the bathroom for her and asked her if she was in trouble. And sure enough, she was being trafficked. And she rescued her. She had authorities at the tarmac when the plane landed, and they were able to arrest him and rescue her. Not everybody wants to be rescued from trafficking. If you had asked me when I was 15 if I wanted to be rescued, depending on the day, I may or may not have. Some of the times I thought I was doing what I wanted to do, and I wasn't under anybody's rules or anything like that. I've told my story here before, so I won't go into it too much, but in my situation, I wasn't safe at home, so running away was my, my freedom.
Was your escape?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I was on the streets, and I was an easy target for trafficking. But I brought my wonderful husband today so that we could talk about the fact that when people get out of trafficking, their whole worlds can change.
Right.
Right.
You know, I know a lot of survivors now who are doing great things. So they're
What-
now social workers and nurses, and some of them are activists, like Rebecca Bender and Tony McGinley. I mean, I'm not going to say her name right now that I said Shannon's name. I'm sorry. I do that. But anyway, so there's lots of people doing lots of great stuff now. And Mark is just so wonderful. And we've been married for 28 years this year. So we're
She
gonna,
married her when she was 5?
so we're actually working on a curriculum to help couples through this. And yeah, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of relationship issues, as you can imagine.
It's got to be horrendous.
Right.
As a result of this,
As a result of trafficking.
Being a
So
part of
yeah.
the past, yeah.
So I was trafficked for 4 years, and
Okay.
it was very brutal, and there were a lot of really, really bad things. I went days without food. I went weeks without sleeping on a couch or a bed, and I went months without knowing if anybody cared if I was dead or alive. And that was the light stuff. That was the easy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the? I heard something. I don't know. I don't even know if it's even true. Okay, it was somebody was telling me. It was Dave Chappelle said it. That women that are trafficked, there's a limit to how many times they can be trafficked before they just go nuts. I don't know if that's actually true, but I do believe, and I know it has to be. What is the the spiritual component? Is it palatable evil? Is it? How did you, looking back? What do you see spiritually about this whole thing? Because I know in like drug addiction and recovery, a big component of recovery, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, is spiritual. Because by the time somebody gets into recovery, they're spiritually damaged.
Yes,
They're
definitely.
beaten and bruised. And in alcoholism and drugs, it's typically a lot of it's self-inflicted, but they're damaged nonetheless. And if they don't start recovering that and working spiritually, they stay damaged. They're just not drinking or drugging. So what's the spiritual component?
So before I do that, I'd just like to differentiate that there are 3 main categories of trafficking. There's labor trafficking, which people are being, basically slaves.
Yeah.
Right? Then there's sex trafficking, where they're being exploited sexually, whether that's porn or actual sex, it could be remote sex, illicit massage, that sort of thing. And then there's trafficking for organs, which does happen here, not quite as much as some other places around the world.
I think
literally
I might.
body parts.
Literally body parts. So Planned Parenthood is actually being investigated right now for the trafficking of body parts. That's the biggest trafficker of body parts in the United States. But it does happen on a small scale too. I shouldn't say that because I don't really know. It's an illicit activity, so we don't know how much it's being done. But it's something we don't hear about that often in the United States. Right? So for me, I was trafficked for sex. I know a lot of other trafficking survivors that were trafficked for sex. And I have long said that sexual abuse is a core violation. It attacks our very essence of who we are, because it's internal, not just external. And I just did a course on trauma and how it affects the brain. And there's literally a core of our brains that's affected by trauma. So it's the amygdala and the hippocampus and the pituitary gland, that very inner part of our brain. And when we're abused as children, it retards our growth in our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain
For reason
that is executive reasoning. So it's the part of our brain that we use to make decisions and understand the consequences. So if you think about a kid, now 80 to 90% of trafficking survivors that are trafficked for sex were sexually abused as children.
Okay.
So it's really high,
What
numbers.
is the core? In other words, is somebody that's been sexually abused as a little kid just more vulnerable? Is there like a sign that goes on their forehead? Hey, I'm vulnerable.
That's exactly what I've said. There's a V on our foreheads. I don't know why, but it does correlate. Is it causation or correlation? I don't know, but it definitely correlates. And so we've got this already this idea that our bodies are just for other people to use. We're worth less than other people. I grew up believing that I was worth less than other people, and so we are easy targets. And you talked about the spiritual component of that. I think that that the abusers have some kind of a sixth sense where they can almost zoom in and see who's easy targets.
Damaged kids.
Yeah, damaged kids, right. And then when you talked about the spiritual component, in it, there is a depth of depravity that's hard to explain. I was purchased by a doctor one time, and after we were together, he said, "So why are you doing this?" I was 14 years old. And
A doctor.
He was a physician, and he took me to his friend's house. So this was in a residence. It was a very nice middle-class house, very, very neat, clean, very nice place. And I was just laying on the bed with my feet up behind me and just kind of kicking my feet going, I don't know, nothing else to do. And that didn't, spark anything in him to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, nothing. He didn't say anything contrary to that. Just brought me back to my pimp and dropped me off outside of the alleyway where the illegal gambling ring was going on.
And here's somebody that's taken the Hippocratic Oath. Wow.
Yeah.
What's the differentiation, for those that don't know, between the word prostitution and what that implies and trafficking? Is there a distinction or is there not?
It's two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Because what you have in prostitution is you have people who want to prostitute themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In trafficking, it's people who don't want to prostitute themselves, but that's what they have in front of them. So it's really hard to tell which it is sometimes. And with a trafficking victim, she may be coerced. The drugs may be her pimp. We talked about, you talked a little bit about drugs and alcohol. In order to deal and to numb from the excruciating pain of physically, emotionally, and spiritually of being sexually abused day after day, a lot of people are using drugs and alcohol. And so that sometimes just becomes the pimp. They're so dependent on that they've got to have it, so they prostitute in order to get it. Right. In prostitution, where someone that's what they want to do, that's what they've decided, they're a full-grown adult, it's still an illicit activity here in New Hampshire. It's not legal, and we hope that won't become legal because it is two sides of the very same coin. It hides a lot of trafficking. And so a lot of people who were prostituted, as I said, at 15, I would have told you, one day I might have said, this is what I want to do. When I was 14 talking to that physician, well, yeah, nothing else to do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a problem for me. Now, that's discounted when we're talking about prostitution because technically anybody under 18 is a trafficking victim. So any sexual exploitation of a minor is automatically trafficking according to the federal definition.
You would hope so. I would like to see that age older.
Yeah.
Till somebody's actually of an age where they can reason well enough to actually.
Right, and they say that age is about 25.
Yeah.
So
25 for boys. You girls get off easier. I think it's like 23 or something.
That's true.
Yeah.
Even 21 depends on who you're listening to.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So when you talk about sex trafficking or prostitution, they're very closely related, and I would even say intertwined, because a lot of people who have come out of sex trafficking, I have survivors that I talked to. They were 16 years in it, 17 years in it, so they were in it for a long enough time that they were grown-ups. But they look back and they say, "Wow, I was really being manipulated." Or I was really under the control of my pimp, and I didn't realize. There's a number of people I can think of right off the top of my head. I don't necessarily have permission to share their stories, but that they were with their trafficker. They had kids with their trafficker, and their trafficker was still turning them out to bring in money for the household. And there was domestic violence involved, and there was a lot of coercion and manipulation. And having broken free from that, now they're activists saying, this was really, it was such a psychological, thing, and I had so many trauma bonds, and I didn't know what I was doing. So it makes it really tough to say that prostitution is okay in my mind, because there's a lot of people who have come out of it saying it was never okay.
Do you, we in the legislature to bring this to, save the one. Tell us what that is and how people can get involved in that before we run out of time.
Okay. Save the One is a global ministry, a global organization, and we're the people that people call exceptions in pro-life legislation, pro-life discourse. So we are conceived by rape or incest, we're mothers from rape or incest, or we're parents of children who have had a poor in utero diagnosis, or the children who have had a poor fetal diagnosis or a fetal anomaly. And we're about, I think we're about 450 members in the United States, and we've got about 130 members overseas in various places. Those numbers sometimes shift a little bit, but all of our members are those people.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're either the moms or the children of those circumstances. And we have about 24, 25 speakers that speak nationally. About a half a dozen of us speak internationally, and then there's another probably half a dozen that speak just regionally across the country. And we tell people that we're people, and hopefully change their mind from that pro-life with exceptions to pro-life 100%, because there's no reason to have exceptions.
Right. Okay. So if how do people get involved in that? Is there a website?
Yeah, save the one, the number one.com. So it's the word save, the word the, and the number one.com. And on there you can sign up for our blog. You can contact any of us.
It's on
ask us to
Facebook
come
too,
speak.
right?
It is on Facebook, yep, and Twitter. Save the One Child on Twitter. It's Save the One Child.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. You remember what the other question I had was?
No,
No,
our
me neither.
Vulcan mind meld
No, it didn't work
has
this
been
time.
fading lately.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear about that organization, because, depending on who you ask, there's a lot of different ways to describe a one that may be seen as being, I don't want to say the word disposable, that's a little harsh, but
yeah.
Minimizing the sanctity of that particular individual's life over another one. I myself was an adopted infant. Now, I didn't have any dark fetal diagnosis at the time or anything, but what you're saying resonates with me simply on the basis of calling attention to the fact that every child is precious and that all life is sacrosanct. And your activities and this organization's activities is just reinforcing that message, which people can't hear enough.
Yeah, with the fetal anomaly issue that you brought up, because you didn't have a dark fetal anomaly, it's really a confused compassion. The same with the rape issue, but it's almost more pervasive, because we think, well, we don't want that child to suffer, but they suffer horrendously, and then the parents also have the guilt of submitting to abortion and causing their death. And so a lot of our members that are well voiced on this, well spoken on this, will tell you that, first of all, the doctors can be wrong. Secondly, if this was a 2-year-old and they got that diagnosis, you wouldn't say, well, you should chop their arms and legs off and have them bleed to death. You wouldn't do that. You would say, oh, spend as much time as you can with that precious little child, be with them and take care of them until the end. And that's what a lot of our moms say. My friend Sarah, her child died, but she was with her till the end. She took care of her for a little bit. It wasn't long after her birth. Our founder, Rebecca Kiesling, adopted a child who had a poor diagnosis, and she died shortly after birth. But she died loved, in somebody's arms and being taken care of. Isn't it reasonable for a civil society to think that we could care for our loved ones when they're dying instead of chopping them up and disposing of them?
Yes.
No, I got weird grandkids. They're always threatening what they're going to do to me when I am no longer relevant. So it's the same thing.
It is.
Because
It
no,
can be.
I'm making a joke because my grandsons are always teasing me about picking really bad, horrible rest homes and stuff like that. But but it's still kind of the same thing. We almost there's elderly people who now are feeling almost disposable.
Yep.
You know, and it's the same. Either God created you, you have a purpose, and no man has the right to dispose of that person, or we're just parasites on a planet and eliminating the ones that aren't really necessarily up to snuff is perfectly reasonable. There's only really two options.
That's right.
Either you have sanctity of life or you don't.
Right. And if you don't, if there is no sanctity of life, and I'm going to forget his name, who is on the President Obama's commission on national health care or whatever it
Is that Mr.
was.
Singer? Peter Singer?
Peter Singer.
Yeah.
I think he said that life really doesn't begin until somebody is
Satiant.
not sentient.
Sentient?
Sentient.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
You were close, though. I couldn't come up with it at all. She got a close.
I'm still
sentient.
working on sentience. I'm not sure when I'll make it.
No, I mean someday. It's
Someday.
you got to aspire to things, you know.
It'll
right.
keep me around.
So anyway, he believes that life doesn't begin until an entity is sentient, i.e., aware of themselves and how they may or may not affect other people around them, and that the age eliminating a child prior to that point in their life is perfectly okay, which I think is somewhere around 1.5 or 2 years.
Right. That it has moved, but he's also said it for the other end of life. So if you go into dementia or you're comatose.
Right. So
Right.
yeah, getting rid of the things on the edges of life, it's perfectly okay.
Seems like kind of an arbitrary standard to impose on.
That is the word I use all the time.
Yeah. You know, we'll pick sentience because it's subjective and we can judge it.
Right.
And that way we get to decide.
Right.
I mean, the standard for death, you know, what constitutes death is uniform throughout the country, if not the world. Brain waves, heartbeat. So would not the converse also be true, how we define life? And when you detect those things in a developing in utero child, it's pretty early.
It is.
It's real early.
It is. There's a heartbeat bill right now in the house.
Is that the one you spoke on today? In my
No, dear. No, I'm talking about the U.S. Congress.
U.S. Congress. What did you? You spoke. You came and spoke on 2 bills today.
Yes.
You want to tell the viewers what hate and discontent you caused today at my committee?
What were the bills about?
So the first bill was a bill to ban a late-term abortion, so after viability. So we're talking about kids that can live outside of their moms, so they no longer need their moms. So when a baby's conceived, they need their mom.
You realize kids no longer need their moms at about 40 or 50,
Oh, I do.
right?
I do, because I have
didn't get that
5. I do have 5.
Okay, so anyway,
Physically,
physically.
they can live without their moms. So we're talking about 5 months in utero, and these are kids that can survive outside the womb, and they literally have to be chopped up and pulled out of the womb piece by piece, or delivered whole, which Gosnell used to deliver them whole, and then he'd cut the spinal cord to kill them afterwards. Also, you can burn them with saline inside and out and then deliver them whole. That's another procedure. This would just ban any of those kinds of procedures after the baby is viable. And it said that a physician delivering the child for any reason, if it's for the mother, so if the mother is going to have irreparable damage to organs.
Right.
I don't have all the words because I should
Yeah.
probably brought the bill with me. But if she's going to have irreparable damage, then the physician is go ahead and deliver the baby, but you're supposed to try to save that baby. And the way that I always say it is, when 2 lives are mutually endangered, the physician has a responsibility to try to save both. It's that simple. It's
Right.
It's really kind of simple to me.
Right. Yeah. There's no reason why you wouldn't try to save both. Yeah. So that was the first one.
That was the first bill.
And that's where the doctor from, was it New Hampshire Medical Society?
Yes.
The doctor from the New Hampshire Medical Society was arguing that late-term abortions never happen in New Hampshire, and that if they were, he would know
You
about
would
it.
know, yeah.
Is that a
Because-
statistical falsehood?
It is. There is no statistics for it to be true or false.
Oh, okay.
The only way you could possibly know that, or is only by theory, by looking at other states.
I see.
They deliberately, every time we've had bills to try to create or acquire statistics, the liberals have killed them, killed the bills. Because as long as there's no statistics, and you can't possibly know there's something going wrong.
And there's no accountability.
There's no accountability, and they don't want accountability. And so anyway, so he makes this grand statement that if there was something going on in New Hampshire, that he would know about
He
it.
would know.
He would know about
He
it.
would know.
So
How
I-
prideful do you think you have to be to know what's going on in the entire state? I just,
Right.
like, that blew my mind.
So anyway,
I
so
wouldn't want that gift.
Yeah.
Omniscience, it's a burden.
Yeah.
I know I deal with it pretty well. But
Do you?
anyway,
Is
so
that why your jokes are so good?
yes, they're awesome. So, so I asked him, because we had also, we knew from testimony. I said, so you know basically everything that's going on in the state. Have you ever met the doctor that actually performs the abortions at the clinic in Manchester? Nope. Nope, doesn't know him. So somehow he knows everything that's going on in the state, but has no idea who that doctor is. Remember the other great question he had no idea about?
I don't know.
Gosnell.
Oh, right. He didn't even know who Gosnell was.
I don't know who Cosmo is.
Well, yeah, but you wouldn't necessarily.
Right. So
He's a doctor. He
Gosnell
absolutely should have.
he should have known, especially if this is an issue that he's going to be involved in, because he should know what's going on both sides if he's going to talk about it.
Sure.
Gosnell was an abortion provider. I hate to use that word. I usually say vendor. He was an abortion vendor in Philadelphia. And his clinic was filthy, filthy, filthy. And his staff were using the drugs they were supposed to be giving to the women, under-medicating women, botching abortions, and delivering late-term abortions, really late, like days before birth, kind of late, like big babies. And then because they were born alive frequently, he would clip off their spine to kill them. He kept like feet in jars in the refrigerator and like really weird kind of stuff, like really creepy stuff too. And so he was convicted. Was it 3 years ago? Gosh,
Wasn't
I
that
don't
long? It wasn't that long ago, but
time flies.
I mean, 3 years. I mean, yes, that sounds about the time frame. But
Yeah, time flies. But it was a pretty big case. It made national news. It was all over the place. You know, it was a really big deal. And anyone who's interested in pro-life issues at all pretty much knows who Gosnell was.
yeah, the two
There's a
things.
book. There's a book, and now I think there's a movie now. A
I
film.
think there's two things pro-life people typically knows: Gosnell and I'm gonna forget her name. Singer. Who was the founder of Planned Parenthood?
Margaret
Margaret
Sanger.
Sanger. Margaret
yeah.
Sanger. Yeah, the two
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, they know Margaret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Margie,
Mm-hmm.
if you like to call it.
If you want to be friendly about
Right,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
She was best buddies with Hitler too.
She had quite an agenda.
She did.
Yeah.
They usually know about Bernard Nathanson also. He
Oh, okay. I don't know that one. Good.
Bernard
Good.
Nathanson was a very active abortion vendor in the early years, and he came out and said, we made up all the numbers during the hearings. He's one of the founders
yeah,
of
yeah.
NARAL, and he said, we just threw 100,000 people out there. We just threw together numbers, and he's on record saying this. He's got a book that he wrote. People have done his autobiography. He's got videos that he did. He produced the silent scream. So when ultrasound first came out and he's doing and he watched the abortion on the ultrasound, it looked like the baby was screaming. And so they named the film The Silent Scream. So if you ever want to be
Unfamiliar.
really knowledgeable about what happens in abortion, that's a film to watch. It's old, it's a little grainy, but that's
horrible.
the truth. Yeah, it's very horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, this doctor that testified today obviously tried to present himself as all so knowledgeable, but he really didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't get where he gets off getting up there and testifying as if he's.
Well, he had a great voice, and he was very charismatic, and his speaking style was very convincing if you don't know the truth. But my young friend who was sitting next to me, I had to kind of hold her down in the chair because she said, "Oh, that's not true. Oh, that's not true." And I'm like, "You'll get your chance. You'll get your chance."
Did she testify?
She did, actually. My name was called, and when you asked me if I testified on the second bill, I actually didn't. I did.
Oh, I lied.
Well,
Good.
you
good.
didn't lie. You
I'm
didn't
a
lie.
politician. We get away with it.
So I deferred to her because she wasn't going to be able to come back.
Right.
And the chairman of the committee said that he would continue the hearing.
At a later
Because-
date,
at a
they'd have to
later date.
reschedule it because there's still a lot of people, and we had to get to the transgender bill.
Right. So
So they
so I
suspended the
deferred to
hearing.
her.
I didn't know they suspended the hearing, so there will be a second.
There will be a
Chance.
continuation.
On second bite of the apple, but that was on the one to that this was that on the first one or the second one?
Second.
Second one. So the second bill is an interesting bill, and again, the good doctor, if you want to call it that, testified against it. But the bill is basically trying to do something to try to make sure that young women, aren't coerced into an abortion.
Yes, and that doctor actually said that he thought that we should have a bill that would not allow women to be coerced out of abortion.
Right. Yeah, he thought the greater pressure was on women not to have an abortion.
Wow.
Yeah, that was what he said. You were correct. So anyway, that was a pretty interesting bill. I think the people from one of the Planned Parent groups or whatever, some group, said that women are already
Screened?
screened.
Yes, that was the people from the I'm not going to say it right. It's the Concord abortion vendor.
Right. I thought
They
that's
just
what.
changed their name. I don't remember what it is.
Right. Yeah, there was a weird name, but I kind of knew who they must be. And do you know anything about that? How true that is? What their testimony was that they go through basically to great pains to make sure that the women are counseled as to what their options are. Is there any pressure for you to do this or anything? Do you know if that's actually legit?
I don't. I know that we had a women's right to know bill across the hall a few weeks before, and I didn't know about it fast enough because I'm not actually part of Right to Life anymore, so I don't necessarily clue into that stuff all the time. But there were quite a few people that I know that were saddened that they weren't allowed to go and testify. Well, I shouldn't say weren't allowed. They would have been allowed if they had known about it.
Mm-hmm.
I did ask for a continuation. I did not ask well. I aggravated the chairman of that committee because I didn't ask well. But
You
yeah, I did.
aggravated somebody?
Mark's
It's hard to
nodding.
believe. That's hard to believe.
I'm surprised.
He calls me Frank. So, but anyway, so I have a number of people that are emailing the committee to let them know that that's not their experience. And a couple of them are post-abortion counselors. So they see numerous women, and that's not the experience that they're seeing when
Right.
people are coming through the doors of their counseling. To say that I didn't feel like I had enough information. I felt, again, pressured into it. A lot of them felt like they didn't have enough information, and that's one of the things that that Kristen said today in the hearing was that she didn't feel like she had enough information, and she felt there was no support for her to choose life.
Right.
Do they also feel hastened into it? make a hasty decision.
Frequently. So I have friends that were abortion clinic directors, and they talk about quotas, and they talk about how few minutes they had with each client. They talk about never using the word baby. They talk about minimizing their experience, the client's experiences. There was a relatively new book out, The Walls Are Talking. If anybody's interested in what clinic directors and clinic staff have to say, it's The Walls Are Talking. Primarily, Abby Johnson is the, I think, first author on there, but there were a couple of other people. I'm sorry if you are a co-writer of that book and I didn't say your name. I don't know it, but The Walls Are Talking is full of what actually happens behind those doors. It's written by former staff and what happens.
These are some great references that people can follow up on that you're sharing. We really appreciate you sharing those resources.
Oh, I can get this list of references from you and post it on Facebook, or you could do it on Facebook on the rock, paper, hand grenades thing. But yeah, it's
Please do.
amazing. It's amazing that it's actually. I still want to go back to spiritual thing. So, what did you do spiritually to recover?
You know, it's funny. I just got that question the other day. I had a young woman call me. She's really struggling with early childhood sexual abuse, and she said, "What did you do? What did you do?" And so I was able to, tell her. Really, I was pregnant, so my total focus was on being a good mom and really being as good to my child as I could. So I focused a lot of my attention on the baby, but at different times I recognized that I needed healing, I needed to change. And so I used the Word of God. Literally, word for word, I would memorize verses. So if I was feeling particularly lowly, like a piece of junk, or I didn't have any value, I would stand in front of the mirror and I would say, "You are the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus." Now, not recognizing myself as being righteous, I'm all that, but in Christ, I am accepting His righteousness. So I was able to move myself out of my own pitiful existence into in Christ and having that righteousness. And we're peculiar people in a royal priesthood and a holy nation and all of those things. I would just tell myself over and over again, God loves me. And my wonderful husband and I did a lot of work with church and youth group and that sort of thing, and we homeschooled our kids, so it was always in our house. And he was gracious enough, he was the breadwinner. I was a nurse, but I wasn't making that much money, and so he and I bought, at the time it was Sky Angel years and years ago.
Sky Angel, you remember that?
Do you? Yeah.
I don't know what it was.
It was all Christian satellite. It was just a Christian satellite.
Yeah.
We pumped that into the house night and day. We had gospel on, whether it was gospel music or preaching on all the time. And, there were a lot of things like walk circumspectly, pay attention to everything around you. A lot of the scriptures that I would recite to myself and my kids were about the mouth, like say things that are honorable, say things that are pure, whatever things are true,
So you can't
meditate
become
on
a
that.
politician then, really.
I know.
Yeah.
That's
I know.
true.
That's sad.
Right?
Yeah.
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 I thought about something. One of the first shows I was on, it may have been the very first show, and I'm not sure if it was you or Matt that asked me, would I outlaw chemical abortifacient birth control? And at that time, I think I was president of Right to Life, and I wasn't really sure because I felt like I didn't have enough information, and I said, well, it's not for me to say. And I thought about it this week, getting ready to come on the show, and I thought, well, this will make me completely unelectable, but I don't want to be elected anyway. So, yes, I would definitely outlaw it. I think that there's been enough evidence now about how it's in our water and it's in our food and it's in our fish. All this chemical, hormones are in our fish and our food and in our water and everything. I would definitely have, a say in trying to outlaw that at this point.
Oh, what?
Chemical birth control.
Is this like, are you 486?
Oh,
that kind
yeah,
of thing?
yeah, okay. I don't remember that far. How long ago was your first show?
I don't know. It was a long time ago.
What's on the
Oh,
market that would qualify as a substance like that?
Are you 486?
What's in use right now?
Oh, well, and
Are
a
you
lot of the
46?
and a lot of the other chemical birth controls, that's over-the-counter birth control, the morning after pill.
Sure.
That. and some of the regular birth control pills would qualify because they don't dissipate. When women take them, they pee them, they get flushed, and then they're in the water.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not good.
can't be good.
Can't be good.
Yeah, we had what in the back of my brain, we had this whole room, Reps Hall, pretty full. I'd say 60% full
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
of people trying to get us to vote for transgender, to have it included as to reasons you can't discriminate as transgender or sexual orientation. No, not sexual
Sexual
orientation's
identity.
already in there. Sexual identity,
Identity, yeah.
which is completely different. Anyway,
Subjective.
yeah, it's too subjective. So
Can be.
I was sitting there and I'm going, the rise of this movement, because it seems like there's more and more of it. I'll bet there's a chemical component to this.
Yeah.
All the hormones and stuff kids are eating and drinking and all that stuff. But anyway,
Well,
that's a subject for
I buy
another.
bottled water. That's what I know.
Right.
The water supply is just too questionable in my
It
view.
is pretty dang questionable.
Sorry, local water companies that provide municipal supplies.
Yeah, but
we
the-
love you. We appreciate the work you
But
do.
a lot of the food, the chicken, if you get chicken, there's all kinds of cattle, there's all kinds of hormones and
a lot of
everything
weird
else.
stuff out there.
And so I bet that's got a lot to do with it, but I don't know. Yeah, so I was really horrible to our guest her first time on the show because I had heard part of your story, and I forget what part it was, but it was
How were you horrible?
because she came on. And I said, "Oh, you got the coolest story.
I got
Tell
an
us your
awesome
story.
story, yeah, I
you got an
remember.
awesome story." And then she looked at me with this, really? That's
Shocked.
awesome. Yeah,
Disbelief.
shocked. She's shocked.
Well, my outcome is awesome. Like I said, we've been married. We've
well, I
been
think
married,
that's
a
what I was
wonderful
conscious.
husband.
I didn't know about the first part of the story, and I don't remember what I knew, but what I knew was not even close to the truth. And so I introduced it like that, and you just looked at me like, "Wow, this guy's touched." So, yeah, that was actually pretty fun. That was pretty funny.
So speaking of positive outcomes, there's other people out there that have struggled with these issues or
Right.
struggled with this kind of victimhood. Where can they turn besides obviously the Word of God being the
Right.
most powerful? But
Right. So
besides
depending on your state of mind, there are support groups, even Facebook groups. So I'm on adult survivors of child sexual abuse, adult survivors of child abuse, different groups like that. Save the One has a group just for moms who've been moms from rape, or we have.
Is there a dads from rape
It's funny you should say that. We're
or
just
guys anyway?
we're just starting that. As I said, Mark and I we're working on a curriculum for married couples, but he's also beginning to minister in the group for men whose wives have conceived in rape. So, and there's another husband. Yeah, so there's another husband that'll be participating in that to be leaders in that.
Yep.
Because they are, they've been through it long enough now that they're, really strong in that area and heavily invested in the outcome of their own marriage. And so,
Right. Yeah.
having a support group like that would be great.
Once you're married, that's a two-part equation.
Exactly.
It's no longer you're not in it alone.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm going to is a huge part of your emotional and spiritual recovery. Just reaching the understanding that you were created by God,
Yeah.
and therefore you have purpose, and therefore also you just because you don't feel good about yourself, God does.
Absolutely, absolutely. Feelings lie, first of all.
Yes.
And the different things that come against us lie. See, I delved really deep into the scriptures when I was homeschooling, especially when my kids were young, and I had the ability to do that because I wasn't necessarily teaching them high school courses. I was able to, teach them
yeah.
a little bit and then get in the scripture myself, and really investigating creation and how everything was created and learning about the laws of creation. And so I learned that God set up all these different laws. So there's like gravity, if you drop something, it's going to fall every time, right? And then there's a law of love and nature. If you look at all the animal kingdoms and people, and we have this innate ability to just love the next generation and care for them and take care of them. And then if you look at, different parts of the scripture where it talks about the devil and about sin, it talks about how that law gets twisted and broken. And so the law of love gets broken, and that's when the law of selfishness comes in.
Yep.
That's when a dad can sexually abuse their 2-year-old, 3-year-old daughter. That's what happened to me. And so when I recognized that this was a matter of someone else breaking the law, it wasn't that God, because some people say God's in control. I hate that. Really, really hate it, because God's sovereign. He created everything. He created everyone, but he gave us free will. And so we can work within the laws of God, or we can transgress the laws of God, and that's what happens. And so when people are damaged by a sexual abuse, it's that someone else has broken those laws. And God's laws, the law of love, love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't boast, it doesn't seek its own way. That's the law of God. And so when I came to realize that those laws were in place, I decided that I could try to live within those laws, and I would live a better life.
Right.
And I think that's what I tried to share with my kids, and I try to share with other people. As I said, I just got a call the other day from a young woman who's struggling right now. And so I minister frequently. People will call me, I'm dealing with this or I'm dealing with that. What should I do? I had a phone call a few weeks ago from a woman who had, she had actually miscarried from a sexual abuse case and was still really struggling with it 30 years later. And she's like, I don't know what to do. So I was able to hook her up with a support group. There are times when someone, you're asking what they should do. There are times when someone would need maybe medication to bridge the gap for them, to help them to get out of that. Obviously, that's a medical supervisory position. Or maybe it's just a counselor. I shouldn't say just, but maybe it's counseling with it's a professional to help them through the trauma. You want to make sure it's a trauma-informed counselor. You don't want to be going to just anyone.
No, you don't want to just start medicating people without working on them, too.
Right.
Darlene, you only have about 30 seconds. Mark, thank you for showing up.
My pleasure. Thank you.
What an awesome couple. You guys are just super cool. It's just...
Thank you.
We really appreciate you being
We are
here.
not
Thank
worthy
you.
of your company.
Oh, well,
I mean him. I
disagree.
am. I am, but...
Because you're the politician who confesses that he lies.
Oh, yeah, that's right, too.
We do these to each other every week, folks.
Okay, so just so you know, next week we're talking about Sunapee and a boat ramp. So it's a little bit lighter.
Lighter, yeah.
So we can
Wow,
make all kinds
that's a
of
dark
boat
subject.
ramp. Now we got to come up with boat ramp jokes.
Say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.